Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's pod, we have a special guest from the United States Coast Guard, Rear Admiral John W. Mauger. Admiral Mauger assumed the duties of Commander, 1st Coast Guard District in May 2022. He oversees all the Coast Guard missions across 8 states in the Northeast, including over 2,000 miles of coastline from the U.S.-Canadian border to northern New Jersey and 1,300 miles of offshore. Rear Admiral Mauger previously served as Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, responsible for the development of national policy, standards, and programs promoting marine safety, security, and environmental stewardship. Rear Admiral Mauger earned a Bachelor of Science degree with honors from the United States Coast Guard Academy in 1991, a Master of Science with honors from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in 1997, and a Master of Science with distinction from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces at National Defense University in 2011. He's a 2009 Fellow of the Graduate School's Executive Potential Program and a 2011 graduate of the Defense Acquisition University's Senior Acquisition course. I got to meet Rear Admiral Mauger when I was president of the Connecticut Maritime Association, and he was kind enough to sit on some panels together. I want to welcome him to the podcast. Admiral Mauger, thanks for coming on the pod.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor, and look forward to the discussion today.
I look forward to having you. Question, so I like to start everybody off here. Tell me a little bit about yourself and about your background and how you kind of got into the Coast Guard and into the maritime end of it.
Oh, thanks so much, Chris. So as the youngest of 3 kids here in the family, and both my parents were teachers, my dad said, you can go to any one of these 5 schools that you want to go to. And it was West Point, Annapolis, Kings Point, Coast Guard Academy, and Air Force Academy. I always had a liking for the sea and the folks that work on the sea. And so I grew up in suburban Philadelphia, spent a lot of time in New England as a kid and a little bit of time on the Jersey coast. But always wanted to get out and see the world and travel. And so the Coast Guard Academy was a natural fit. It's been a remarkable career. I've spent most of my career as a maritime regulator, but I find myself today representing, as you indicated, leading the 1st Coast Guard District and representing the 11,000 men and women that work along the New England coastline to ensure the safety, security, and sustainability of our nation's waters. So it's really a thrill to come to this point in my career.
And it's fantastic. I know your passion for not only the sailors who are Coast Guard, Coast Guard men and women, but the sailors who sail out at sea, whether U.S. flag or other nation flag, definitely shows through. Certainly when we got to sit together at the CMA. As you know, the theme of this podcast is the last dinosaur. The maritime industry is definitely the last industry to fully embrace the digital technology. Certainly for those that don't know, and I hope I got this right, the Coast Guard motto is Semper Paratus, always ready, right? And I love that. That is a great motto. I'm a little biased. My grandfather, my great uncle served in the Coast Guard during World War II. So it's not maybe how I have my bias. But so talk to me a little bit about how the Coast Guard is readying for this digital change or is in the middle of it, both internally for, how things get done internal and then externally dealing with, as you said, the mariners that you've dealt with at the national level and now more with the 1st District.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Hey, first, let me just acknowledge the work that our seafarers do, both within the U.S. and internationally. These are really key vital workers that drive our U.S. economy. Maritime transportation system contributes 1/4 of U.S. GDP, provides employment for 1 in 7 Americans. And so these are folks that literally help us put the clothes on our back, the shoes on our feet, the food on the table. And so without them, we wouldn't be able to benefit from the riches that we have. And so I'm really thankful for the work that they do every day and look forward to continuing to support them. You're absolutely right about our motto, Semper Paratus. Always ready. It really drives what we do from the operational edge to the strategic edge. And, one of the really unique things about being here in the first Coast Guard district is that so much of our history for the Coast Guard comes from these communities in New England, and so much of that culture, that drive, that spirit that we saw back in the early times of our history, back in the late 1700s, throughout the 1800s, that kind of culture and spirit is still relevant in our force today. And so when we look at how the world is changing, we continue to be the best in the world at providing for maritime safety, maritime security, maritime sustainability. There's no one better than the U.S. Coast Guard when we're fully equipped and trained to do the job. But we also have to realize that how we do that over our long storied history changes. The capabilities change, the environment changes, the tools, the authorities change. And so we're in this period of time of great change right now with regard to data and how we use data to drive our operations.
As you're changing, and I'm sure you get the same thing internally as a lot of people get externally, you have people who've been out at sea, forever, or been with the Coast Guard forever. Do you get a lot of pushback, or given that I would have to say the Coast Guard is, because you deal with the industry and you deal, more than other, certainly more than other, defense branches, you deal with industry, deal with people. Are you getting this massive pushback internally like we see some places, or is that kind of eased, especially as some of the older folks start to retire, maybe folks who are a little more resistant, they just naturally retire, and you're getting a younger generation that's embracing it? How have you guys kind of managed that?
Yeah, thanks so much. So let me talk about what we're doing internally first, because I think that's such an important part of, in order for us to be effective maritime regulator, in order for us to be effective presence in governing the maritime domain in this changing environment, we have to make sure that we're internally ready. And so in order to address those challenges, the very first thing that we did was put together a data strategy for the Coast Guard. And so I would say that the main part of this data strategy is realizing that our data, our information is an operational imperative. It represents tremendous organizational value for the service. And so we have to treat it not like a back office admin support function, but as an operational necessity for our force. And so earlier this year, Commandant signed out a Coast Guard data strategy that has essentially kind of 5 main pillars in it. First, that data governance piece that everybody talks about. We're going to generate more data in the next 2 years than we have in our history to date. So managing and governing this is a big deal. But the second part of this is our real value, as important as data is, our real value is in our people. And so we need to bring the workforce along. And so there's a workforce training element to that. There's a data fidelity, making sure that, we have good, accurate, trustworthy information that we can continue to work through. And then there's a focus on the technology piece, and then a focus as well on piloting and doing real-time testing and experimentation, both for support and for operational functions. The backbone of all of this is a new integrated data environment for the Coast Guard. We've named it Surveyor, which harkens back to our history and one of the very first revenue cutters, the Surveyor that went out, as part of the early missions of the Coast Guard to survey the coastline and carry out safety and security functions for the nation. And so this Surveyor integrated data environment links from the strategic down to the operational and tactical level to bring different sources of information, provide the workforce with tools to do that analytics. All of this is being driven by a newly established Office of Data Analytics. So the Coast Guard is all in on this. We've got some really top leaders driving this. It's a lot of education, a lot of continued communication to help people understand, how important it is, how we're driving it forward. But I think one of the, greatest opportunities is really unleashing the power by just making it available to some of our newer folks to work with it, manipulate it. They're digital natives. They understand this, and it's been really exciting to see them work.
I think that that is something that we're seeing in the maritime community as well, is that you get these folks who are, like you said, digital natives. And I think, from generationally, you and I are similar. It's like, yeah, we know there's a power here, but maybe you could, we know what we want. Now go execute. And it sounds like the Coast Guard truly is, showing their leadership in this, because certainly the maritime industry, they have to do it on a company by company basis, or maybe on the IMO level. But certainly, I would imagine by looking at the Coast Guard, people could say, listen, if this big organization can do this, we can do this as well, and go along with this. So that's actually really fantastic. Looking at as the Coast Guard's going through this, any sort of surprises that you've seen or challenges that you've kind of come across, during this data transformation?
Again, the more that we can push these tools down to the tactical edge and let our folks have access to that and work with that in a safe, secure environment, I think this is really going to unleash the full power of this. This is not something that just happens at a small office at headquarters. It's really got to be resonant in all of our operations and provide opportunity to change how we operate, to use data to drive and make better informed decisions. We have plenty of examples throughout my career and my history where when we give the industry, when we give the boating public more information, they make better decisions, right? We had a number of cases about 10 years ago off the coast of San Francisco where the weather data for, the port community and immediate coastline didn't reflect where folks were doing recreational fishing, further offshore, 15, 20 miles offshore. And so we responded to a lot of cases. What we found out is when we could put more information where they were working and provide that information to them, a weather data buoy that broadcasts back the conditions, then folks make better risk-informed decisions. So I think that one of the surprises, one of the ahas, is we have a whole bunch of organizational data that we need to share with others as well, so that they can make better risk-informed decisions. Plenty of challenges across the board, right? Change is hard. It's hard for our people. It's hard for the technology. It's hard to balance security and access, all of that stuff. But this is something that we didn't invent. We're just trying to make sure that we've got the right strategy and the right process and people and training in place to take advantage of these new opportunities that are coming up.
You mentioned boating, and the other kind of parallel to that, obviously, is seafarer health and well-being and everything. And having all this data, is this one of the things that you would look at helping to promote? Because a lot of more data isn't necessarily people can get inundated with data, right? And helping make good decisions. But certainly seafarers' health and well-being, how has this played into it? I would imagine, I know that's a key role for you guys to look after.
Yeah, thanks. I think, again, if I look over the course of my career, our seafarers have undergone a tremendous amount of changes, and the expectations on them as, shipping has changed, and as societal expectations for shipping have changed. And so really making sure that we continue to keep seafarers in the focus for this. As we look at increasing sensorization and communication equipment on ships, in some cases, it makes it a little bit easier for seafarers to stay connected to their families and to what's going on. And so hopefully that provides a benefit, though we also know that that constant connection can also be a stressor. When we look at kind of the old throughout the history, we have a lot of old heuristic kind of rule sets that are based on generally conservative experience and science and engineering about, when things fail or when they need to be replaced and all that kind of stuff. With the advent of all these sensors, the advent of all these communications, we can go to more condition-based surveys, condition-based maintenance. And so hopefully that changes the demands on the workload for our seafarers as well, and provides, opportunity for autonomy to help them and more information to help them with their jobs. But I think other than that, the focus is really on education and really on looking out for them and helping them to manage this change.
I know one of the things that you pointed out is sometimes more communication becomes a distractor and become a little bit of a stress point, because people are now knowing what's going on at home, or things like that, which does, especially, talking to some folks, on the places where there is a lot of communication, like the Western River, the Western Rivers and those sort of places, your constant cell phone contact, where even 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, that was less likely. So certainly that is a highlight. Another thing that we're seeing, and not to put you on the spot a little bit, but autonomous shipping and things like that, that's another kind of area where you guys have to be prepared from, because there are those in industry that are pushing for more autonomous shipping. And I would imagine that as you go through your own digital transformation and having data points, that's going to be another kind of, maybe more of a regulatory point of view, but something else that you're going to have to look after as well. Have you guys, I'm sure you've thought about it, but has it really gotten traction on your end in terms of regulation or approach or what have you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much. So my colleagues at Coast Guard headquarters are working very closely with the shipping community, the International Maritime Organization over in London, on their maritime autonomous surface shipping project. And this is really looking across. The first step in this project was really to look across the full set of rules and regulations and understand where we've either explicitly relied on a mariner or implicitly relied on a mariner being involved in, some standard or some expectation. And so if you can think about, the collision avoidance regs, or COLREGS, there's a lot of places where it calls out, sight and sound. Somebody has to either be able to see or hear something. And that was always implicitly assumed that there was going to be a person physically on that ship to see or hear that, because, for thousands of years, that's the way it's been. First step was really to understand how our regs either explicitly or implicitly rely on people. And then the next step is, how do we move forward in a phased approach to make sure that we're developing and understanding the technology in a safe, responsible way, taking advantages of the new opportunities, but without creating hazards. And I think this is the challenge that you see all around the world. We've seen fully autonomous ships stand up in very limited circumstances. People typically reference it, hey, where it's dull, dangerous, dirty, or distant, that's a good, opportunity for autonomy. And so there's a ship that hauls a whole ton of ammonium nitrate down and along the Norwegian coast, which is a dangerous maneuver. And so that's a good operation for it. We're starting to see it pop up in the US in locations as well. And so we're working right now kind of case by case to address those risk factors as we go forward. It's certainly something that's coming. I think for a long time, we're going to see more increased enabling the mariners as opposed to replacing the mariners. It's something that certainly continues to develop. And we continue to work very closely with the industry to make sure that we're not creating undue hazard.
When you mention implicit versus explicit, this podcast is done, I just to let everybody know, I do it with a Zoom call, and I'm looking at it, and I think the Admiral saw me shake my head like, I never thought about that. I had my second mate's, third mate's license from SUNY Maritime, and I read those COLREGs. I have my copy that I used at school behind me, and I never, when he started to say that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's how you have to think about it. How are the laws were written, and they were written in a way that have been, they've been changed, modified here and there over time, which, I think as anything, any laws you have to do, especially rules of the sea. And I never thought about that. And to take that approach was pretty, I think you saw the light bulb go out of my head. I almost fell out of my chair because I thought that was kind of interesting. But saying the autonomous ship, going back to that, it's an interesting thought, because what you hear proponents of, autonomous ships or less people involved is to keep the human in the loop. The human is never out of the loop. It's just to help them, the sailor, the seafarer, make decisions based on data that they would have had to otherwise collect. In other words, it avoids a step and gives it in a package that allows them to make a higher order decision faster. So it's really great to hear that the Coast Guard's involved, because you guys are such on the leading edge of this. And like I've said before, have to work so closely with industry. It's so important. And it's great to hear that, because I think it's a truly symbiotic relationship, right? We do our part, you do your part. We try to keep in the middle someplace, which is pretty awesome. Talking about all this cool technology and the new directorate that you have, where it's the digital center, and I'm sorry if I got that wrong. If you had to rewind and talk to the you getting out of the Coast Guard Academy in 1991, or maybe you go down there, given that it's within your command, and you talk to graduating seniors, what advice would you give them, and what would you tell them to be on the excited for and to be on the lookout for? Because I'm sure a lot of people in the Coast Guard, they want to fly the helicopters and they want to go arrest bad guys for drugs and other things. But what would you tell them that's exciting?
Yeah. Hey, first and foremost, I think we've never been at a more exciting time. I look at, kind of all of the change and opportunity that's coming, and am really excited about the future. I also look at, we continue to attract really high quality people of character who put service over self. And so I'm really excited for the service as well. I often tell people when I'm talking with them that the worst career advice I ever got was from a Coast Guard admiral. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, especially since I've become an admiral. But let me tell you that story real quick. So I graduated from the Coast Guard Academy with a degree in computer science. And I thought that I could see, some of the change that was happening with the advent of personal computers. When I showed up to my first ship in 1991, the engineering officer pulled me aside. I was a damage control assistant or assistant engineer on board. And he said, hey, there's this thing sitting on the desk in the damage control office. Why don't you find out if you can do something with that? And of course, it was a personal computer. This predates Windows. So it wasn't even a Windows computer at that time. And we ended up automating the stability tables so we could calculate the stability for the vessel in real time. Something simple, but it was an example of unleashing that power down at the tactical edge and trying to change the business as a result. I ended up working in a computer center for the Coast Guard back in 1994. And at that time, we were downsizing the government. There's a big peace dividend going on, and the military was getting smaller. And so we were getting folks from that unit were getting escorted out of the service pretty quickly as part of the overall shrinking of the force. And an admiral came down to talk to me and give me a pep talk about the future. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I want to go get a master's in computer science. He said, hold on a sec. I don't need anybody in my staff that knows anything about computers. I'm in charge of computers. I don't even have one on my desk. So find something else to do. Find something operational to do. So I said, yes, sir, and put my computer science streams aside and went off and got a master's in engineering and have been working in this industry ever since. It obviously worked out great. Around about 1998 or so, a message came out on the board when the Coast Guard finally realized that, hey, we do need computer scientists, and they were offering $20,000 to anybody that had a computer science degree to stay in the service and continue working it. And so I offer that because times are changing really quickly, and we're in another period of great change. And the way that I see it, Chris, you hinted at this, the way that you and I see it might not be the way that it unfolds. And so I would encourage our young folks to be brave and be audacious about, the future that they see, make sure that they continue to educate themselves, make sure that they continue to drive it, and help guide that future for us. We're really dependent on them to help do that.
I have my own bring a computer on a ship story. Sailing in 1995, after I did a year as an AB, I got shoved down the hawse pipe. So I bought a laptop after my first trip as mate, a little money, bring it on board. And the captain says to me, oh, you have a laptop? Yeah, I was third mate. Yeah, he goes, all right, cool. He said, walks below, opens the door. How you doing, mate? Good. Don't turn 2 for overtime. Now, overtime, U.S. flag. I mean, that was, I was working for an oil company. You made a lot of money. And he takes a stack of papers. It was all the safety filings, the pre-ISO, ISM. Yeah, fill these out for me. I don't feel like doing them. It could be your overtime. Okay. It was work from home, but it was almost a pre-work from home. I sat in my office, put the tunes on, literally did the paperwork for the captain, making my overtime wage. And people are like, where's Chris? He's not turning 2. No, he's turning 2. He's doing the paperwork for the safety meetings we've had. And then actually that led to my job coming ashore for Mobile, because they needed somebody who understood computers, could write reports. It was
Sure.
really simple. Again, not a computer guy. And now here we are. So certainly your advice is well taken. I think, like you said, we don't see it the same, but we know there's a need for it, and just keep enthusiastic. And that's what I tell everybody from the maritime schools, or, if I run across a Coast Guard Academy grad, just keep your eyes open, because there's so much happening and there's so many places for you to fill in and really thrive. As we wrap up, I love to ask the following question. And this is not a setup question, but are you reading any good books? And I've had a few of my guests say they're actually writing some. I don't know where you stand there. I also know you're super busy, but you do a lot of traveling. So maybe if you have a quiet time, are you reading anything good right now?
Yeah, I obviously think it's critical to keep reading throughout your career. General Mattis had a great quote about it. If you're too busy to read, that means, you're too busy to care for your people, and something along those lines, paraphrasing. But so I just wrapped up two books. One, Dead in the Water. You probably know this story about the Brillante Virtuoso. This was, kind of an infamous case of a faked pirate attack and salvage that two investigative journalists really kind of walked through about a 10-year period uncovering the history. I'm fascinated in that because this maritime industry is a passion. I realize that, the Coast Guard, as much influence as we exert, we only see a very small part of the industry. And so try and stay up on what's going on in the industry through that one. And then the other book that I just wrapped up is called The Conversation. It's a book by Dr. Livingston out of Harvard about how to talk about racism in the workplace. And certainly a really important topic, really important book. And I appreciate his approach to taking on that difficult topic.
And especially leading a team, multicultural, you get everybody, all sorts of different people with different backgrounds, and certainly having something like that helps. I'm just finishing up Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. The power of
Does that describe you at all?
I do enjoy meditation. I find that I meditate, maybe not in a 100% traditional way, sitting on a pillow, as they say, but I meditate when I walk. I try to walk once or twice a day, where just like a half an hour, where I really put the phone away and just kind of focus on one thing. Of course, I do walk in a park, and occasionally there are coyotes, and there was bear reported. So we try to avoid those things, but it's pretty well populated, mostly with people who put their dogs off a leash. So I try to read that. That's actually good. He has a couple of good books. He has a podcast. It's a very nice, I think meditation is something that most people can use. And I think has a lot different stigma than you and I were growing up, where it was like, oh, that guy meditates. Okay. He's over there. I think I find leadership and other stuff do that as well. Well, as we wrap up, thank you so much for coming on, Admiral. I do appreciate it. I know you're very busy. You have a lot of other things to do. So I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast, and thank your entire staff. I'll reference them in the post. They were all really super awesome and made this really easy to do. Thank you again.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. And thanks for putting your voice out there and telling these stories. And especially thanks for continuing to look out for and advocate on behalf of the seafarer. Really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of The Last Dinosaur. You can find out more about Rear Admiral Mauger and the U.S. Coast Guard through links in the show notes. A special shout out to the Admiral's staff, Captain Andrew Brown, Commander Joseph Risso, Lieutenant Brandon Newman, and Lieutenant JG Madeleine Khoilian. The Last Dinosaur can be found in all the places you normally get your podcasts, such as iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And we have a YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano, wishing you all fair winds and following seas.